Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and today I am joined by Tim Kearney from Tabletop Terrors and Absolute Tabletop. How are you doing today, sir?
Awesome. Actually having a fantastic day, man.
Yeah, I just noticed you have a luchador mask behind you.
Yeah. This is my geek shelf here. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
actually so funny story. That was a gift for my wedding from my best friend. He got it for me. It was the strangest thing. I was like, "Oh, thanks." He's like, "Yeah, man." So so I put it on the shelf. So, and he purposely got the one that looks like Nacho Libre.
yeah, yeah.
Because I don't know if
That's
you've
a
ever
good
been to
friend.
Mexico. It's a really good friend. I don't know if you've ever been to Mexico, but where we were, um, there's an entire huge shop. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, as big as a convenience store, and the walls are lined with those kinds of masks, and they have like bootleg like Spider-Man ones, and
yeah.
they have like any kind of mask you can imagine. So it's pretty crazy.
Funny story. I almost got trapped in Mexico. We did that fantasy cruise, and one of the stopovers was Mexico. And my wife has a girlfriend that had moved there, so we had spent the day hanging out with them. And we literally like caught the last ferry
Oh
back,
yeah.
yeah, back to the island where we needed to be on.
Oh buddy.
And like when we came running up the dock, like they were like literally waiting for us. We were the last ones.
I know that story. That
Yeah.
exact same thing happened to us because we messed up the exchange rate in one of the countries we were in, and we didn't have enough by like $5 to pay our meal bill at a Hard Rock Cafe.
Uh-huh. Oh
And it was
no.
so we basically it was a whole thing. My wife had to go back to the boat, get the money, come back, and we were the last ones back the second round. They were literally waiting for us.
Yeah. Please don't leave without us. Yeah.
Please.
And my son, he's like, "Can we stop and get something from my girlfriend?" I'm like, we can, but I have a feeling you're not going to be able to give it to her because we're going to have to stay here. So they're very
uh,
adamant about the boat will leave without you too.
yep. Yep. Yeah, they ain't playing. They ain't playing. So
So you people thought we were going to talk about RPGs, didn't you?
psych. No, yeah, so
How's your
we got a lot
apocalypse
of really
been,
cool.
man?
I was gonna say it's been fruitful. We have devoted a lot of the time to being able to work on some stuff that we're going to be releasing, and also finish a Dead Man's Guide to Dragon, which is our campaign setting guide. In the Kickstarter, we were like, yeah, it's going to be like 375 pages.
Mm-hmm.
That book is almost 500 pages now.
You
We just
guys are
kept
just,
jamming stuff in
you
there.
guys are just showing off at this point.
So one of the main things that I wanted to tell anybody who's watching this is we're
Uh-huh.
giving away the core character creation stuff for free. So it's like 75 pages. It's got a bunch of really cool like art in it. It's the world lore, and then a ton of different like cultures. So what we did was we did something totally different with race and subrace. So instead of making it race and subrace, we broke it into two different pieces. One is called heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and one is called culture. So instead of a subrace of like you're a mountain dwarf, we made 11 very unique unto their own cultures in the world. So you could be like a Grimdal, which is like this desert dwelling horse lord, or and we kind of split up the mechanics differently. You'll end up with a 5e equivalent character, but we kind of made it so that it was just a lot more versatile. The other cool thing you did with cultures is rather than like, hey, you're a mountain dwarf, so you do X, this one thing, we have like between 4 and 6 cultural traits you can choose from instead. So not every Grimdal is the same and can do the same stuff. So you could have a party with 3 different Grimdal and they all chose different traits and they'll be totally different and unique.
What's a Grimdal?
So a Grimdal is it's one of the cultures, and they are specifically, they're known for like being these desert dwelling, wanderlust sort of like spiritual people, and they revere these things called the soul winds and all that stuff. So just think of them as like, instead of us doing sub races, we basically did like what you'd have as like a culture in Star Wars, where it's like, oh, okay, cool, they're the Mandalorians, and you kind of know what you're doing when you see it. Like, oh, cool, they're a bounty hunter kind of. So we have like our Mandalorians are called the Granok Thane, and so all that stuff is like totally free, 100% if you want to play in Dragon Grin.
Cool. There's a link in the description for folks that want to check that out. Go download that for free. Yeah, so like some of the D&D-isms need to just change and get fixed, right? Because the terms just don't really work anymore. You know,
It's
like,
true.
We've used race forever, and it's just that the word's never been used right. Like it's never been a race, right?
Exactly.
Because most of the things aren't even close to being the same species. Like a minotaur,
Right.
centaur, and a halfling. They are way different things.
Yeah, exactly. Like totally different. And that's kind of where we attacked it from. The whole, and we did this quite a while ago. We made this decision, and then there was a lot of dust ups, with, and rightly so, for, this race is good at this thing, and kind of just breaking those mentalities. And so that's also something that we did in the book as well, is if you choose like we also did some combining. So like halflings and gnomes are kind of the same. They're not, but they're kind of the same. So we just lump them together and we call them Darrow. So you're like small folk, and you can be whatever kind of small folk you want. But instead of it just being you gain X, it's so that you don't always end up with the Elven Ranger, because you want to, get the best mechanical results. So instead, we made it so that you can choose either dexterity or intelligence to increase by 1. Same thing with the cultures. When you get that as the quote sub race, it's you choose 2 from strength, constitution, and intelligence, and increase both by 1. So again, giving you some more levers so that not every character is the same, and also showing a little more diversity.
Cool. If you guys have been working on Dragon Grim for a while, I mean, I'm pretty sure we had you guys on during the Kickstarter and the first go around for the live chats. Like we were doing that, and that's like a couple years ago.
Yeah, and it's been that long, and so what we did, and we'll cop to it. We were late with the book, but we over communicated why and how long it would be, and we stuck to the second deadline. Basically, what ended up happening was we were like, man, we discovered some things where this can absolutely be better.
Yeah.
And so we decided, rather than keep them the way they were and release a book on time that we weren't as proud of. My daughter's Zoom bombing. So, but instead of, yeah, you're hungry. Okay, well, why don't you go get yourself a cheese stick or a yogurt? Okay. This kid eats me at a house and home. She's eating all the time.
Yeah, now. Kids are like that. They always want to eat.
But anyway, so what it was is we were like basically halfway to the deadline where we promised it, and we were like, you know what? We can make a really cool book with a bunch of extra stuff that's better. And so we communicated that to the backers. Hey, this is what we're doing. We laid out a concrete timeline of what we were doing, why we were doing it, and when the new pieces would be delivered, and we didn't miss a single second deadline. And the result was like almost a book that was almost 50% bigger.
Yeah, well, if you're going 300 to 500 pages, that's a thick book.
It
500-page book. Like,
it's going to be like...
I think like the Starfinder and Pathfinder books are like 400 pages.
Yeah, what we did was we kind of were looking, because we were nervous. We didn't want it to be so big that it was like totally unusable and people would just never pull it off the shelf. So it's the same rough size as like Edge of the Empire.
You're going to be able to use it for like self-defense. It'll stop bullets.
It will stop bullets. That would be a really cool promotional video. I know it sounds ridiculous and dangerous, but if you got like a slow motion camera and shot up a thick role-playing game book with some sort of
Well,
assault weapon.
it's been done. Frog God Games.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, they took. I think it was their Blight book, or Bard's Gate. One of them. They make some ridiculously sized books, or they used to anyway. They stopped doing it, but they had a defect, so they weren't going to be able to do anything with it. So the owner shot it, and it stopped the bullet. So,
oh wow, yeah. Dude, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. I would love to see that video.
So BK Dan wants to know, is a D20 system or a 2D20 system? It's a supplement for 5e.
It is. It's fully 5e compatible. It's absolutely fully 5e compatible. So there's tons of stuff in there that if you get the book itself, there's tons of stuff in there that is totally agnostic. Like a cool, lean, like we wanted to make everything usable. So the whole point of this book, and you're going to see this as you go through it, it's not about memorizing our world. It's about us giving you a framework, and then you just do whatever you want with it. And so we've got a lot of really positive feedback of, like, there's a crime and punishment section in there that you could drop into any world, and it's real clean and easy to use. There's a calendar. There are 2 new crafting systems. All that stuff, you could use it in any world, and it's play tested, and it's just narrative enough, but it's also got a little bit of crunch.
Why 2 new crafting systems?
Great question. So the first one, yeah. So in the world, there were these 2 powerful forces way back in the day. One, the Primordials, the other, the Titans. So think of the Primordials as being like almost like big elemental kaiju kind of. And then the Titans are sort of like, almost like giant sort of Protoss, but less alien, but like tech and like. So one of them, the Titans, they have their remnants they left behind. That's like a magic item crafting situation where it's like you put together these pieces of old Titan tech called Archons. And so you like hunt for them, you dig them, and then you like combine these weird Titan tech pieces, and then you roll to get strange results. The other one, the Primordials, you basically harvest their remains. So it's a little more like building mundane items, but you could like build your own stuff. You can build clothes and armor and different things. So one is more like a magic item crafting system, and the other one is like more of an equipment crafting system.
And they're very specific to those 2 different elements. Gotcha.
They are, yeah. And you could absolutely just take everything that says primordial and then just make it whatever phlebotinum in your world is. Yeah. Like, okay. Same thing with the Titan stuff. You could make it just, a magic crystal exploded, and you take these magic pieces of magic crystal and combine them. It's super easy and modular.
So when you originally said it, in my mind was like, oh, so crafting has always been something that people have kind of groused about in 5e. So like they made another crafting system, but they couldn't stop at 1, and they made 2. But no, it's very specific.
Yeah. And we tried to keep it very, like I said, it's just narrative enough. To me, this is just my preference. It's my play style. I'm not looking to add more bookkeeping to my 5e games.
Yeah.
So I'm not about like, I'm not trying to make a computer game. And a lot of crafting systems would work really well if a computer was doing it and keeping track like a video game. So instead, we made it so that it's pretty narrative and rules light, but there are still guidelines so that there's flexibility and a little bit, you still get the fun sort of like, oh, how many, units of primordial bone do I have? But it's just tracking like one thing.
Yeah.
And it's not this many blood plus this many bone equals this. But then if you combine the blood and the bone, you can get this element. And it's like, it's just not usable at the table for me. So we tried to make something that would just be real clean and easy and kind of like fun,
Yeah, the trick with 5e is like maintaining the spirit of the game, where
right.
I find that like I've seen a lot of supplements and things that come out, and it's just like you just want to play 3rd edition, don't you? Just play 3rd
Seriously.
edition. You can still play that.
And that is what we didn't want to do.
Yeah.
Same thing. What do you always hear? Travel. Everyone's got all these travel subsystems, and we made our own. But it's not. If I'm watching a show, it's rare that the the premise of the show is, oh, now they have to stop and find food and find their way. And sometimes it is, but if that's all you do on the journey, it gets boring. So same thing. We made a sort of scene generator, something that you can use. It worked really well. I use it in my own games. It's the travel system that I wanted, basically.
Have you seen the journey system from Middle Earth?
I have. And I think for me, again, it almost works, but it makes the game just about small details.
It's weird, right? So on one hand, it's kind of cool, but on the other hand, it's not something I actually care about in my games, because it's like, it's a system that's basically this skill challenge, which challenges are cool, but it's kind of a skill challenge that's designed to kind of make you suck when you get to the adventure.
Exactly. And it's not, I have no problems with the system, but it's also not something you could just like run on the fly. So if the players, or not easily for me, if the players are like, hey, we want to take a journey, that's like, okay, hold on. Like, you have to figure out where you're going and how long it's going to be, and then assign roles, and then everybody's going to roll for it and all that. And so it's like, we wanted something that could exist in the same, like, if you want to use that, that's great. But like for us, what we did was we basically created a scene generator. So it's got like, you know, a tone of like, it could be glorious or chaotic or tense. Then you roll an event, and then you roll what it's related to. So like, you could get, for instance, philosophical is the tone, the event is moral quandary, and it's related to the party member's past. So if you want to have a scene during travel, that's what's important. It's not that you're traveling, it's the conversation you have. If you don't want that, and you're like, hey, I just want to narrate that you arrive at the city gate, we still have this thing called a glance generator, which gives you these tiny little mechanical like things that happened, but you just say that they happened.
Right.
I'll give you an example. You know, you roll a 4 and it's scuffle with a minor threat. Everyone succeeds on a skill check or an attack roll, or they take minor damage. That's it. And it's just like, oh, cool. It's a cool little thing of like, oh, you got into a skirmish with some of these creatures, you take a little damage. So it's kind of like the diet version of what Middle Earth is trying to do. It just gets straight to the point.
Yeah, I played that game, and we did the journey phase, and we did reasonably well, and you still end up exhausted with a level of exhaustion. So, which, you know, it doesn't seem like a big deal until you start trying to do a lot of things that are actually not combat.
Right.
And
exactly.
Doing everything with disadvantage just sucks.
It really does. That it actually, you're going to fail most of the time like that. Yeah. And you don't, like you say, you don't realize it until you have it. And that's one of the things. So there is one on there that says you gain exhaustion, but there's also good stuff. So like if you get lucky and you roll kind of high, it says you actually, a friendly faction grants you refuge, gain the effects of a long rest. So you could actually get lucky, and then it's like, oh, cool. It's like we had a long rest on the travel. So you show up. So just little stuff like that where it keeps it so that you're not always going to suck when you show up to the adventure. Mm-hmm. But that's just a fun thing to narrate. So it wasn't just like, okay, you arrive. So it's something between a full-blown random encounter or some subsystem and just like, hey, cool, this happens. Oh, cool. Everybody marks their sheet and they feel like something happened when they traveled.
Yeah, oftentimes in our own games, we'll just like, narratively, the DM will turn it over to the players and be like, hey, what's a cool thing that happened during this 2-week journey? You know, it could be good, bad, or indifferent.
Right.
So I mean, we've kind of taken that stance in our game. So a tool like that's really interesting and great for sparking, some ideas, maybe, because not every player participates in that. Some players, they're kind of put on the spot when you're
sure.
Like, hey,
they don't like that.
Yeah. It's I don't know if it's that they don't like it or it's just like a new concept to them. So they're like taken aback. You're like, what do you mean? Only the DM says what happens.
Yeah. That's funny because my play style too, as a DM, is extremely collaborative, and I am 100% okay to show you all the warts or tell you I don't know or say, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And so we actually ran a game on Mini Terrain Domain's channel for an event called Jasper's Game Week. Like a suicide prevention and awareness fundraiser. And there were a lot of people that had never seen us play. And so, the players would say, "Oh, well, how long is the rope?" And I'd go, "I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? Do you think it's maybe like 50 feet and like frayed and we're going back and forth." And the comments we were getting of like, "Oh my God, they're having a conversation. The DM isn't just saying what it is."
Yeah.
I would make the final call, but I really love collaborating. And if your idea is cooler, I'll be like, "Yeah, I'll allow it. Yeah, let's do that." Or like retconning small things. Oh, actually, let's make the rope 20 feet now because see, it's the perfect length. Oh, cool. That's just fun for me rather than getting it perfect and presenting it to you as the dungeon master. It's like, nah.
Yeah, I've also seen DMs that'll give like a really like loose description and then turn it over to the players so that they can ask questions and they're kind of like filling in the details with their inquiries, but like, and if it's something reasonable, then yeah, it's there. I mean, and so we've done like different things like that in our games. Of course, we have that one buddy you have to watch all the time, but who tries to? There's a sack of gold in the corner. No, there's not. Settle down.
There's a stack of gold in the corner.
Personally, I love that stuff, but I love to do like as a player, I'm an instigator, so I love to do like complications for us, as opposed to just like cool scenes. I'm a chaos monkey. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff that it makes a lot of sense that you do the thing that is going to cause the most conflict because that's the most story. You know what I mean?
Oh no. I just lost Tim. Well, hopefully Tim will be back in a moment. In the meantime, I guess the show must go on. I don't know what happened down there in Florida. But with that, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and I will get to them. I'm not going to mess with the overlay quite yet because I have high hopes that maybe Tim shall return to us. But speaking of Dragon Grim and narratively doing things, in the description as usual you can find links to Tabletop Terrors and the absolute tabletop stuff that they've got going on, to the website over there, as well as you can go download the Dragon Grin supplement for free, which is really cool. With that, like I said, if you got questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and I will begin answering them. Speaking of the narrative, that we've done in our games, we've used it to introduce like cool and interesting NPCs that didn't exist before that, which then became reoccurring characters. I think during one of our games, someone introduced this like garish dwarven traveling tinkerer, and then they started showing up again. In one of the other games when we were investigating the blood cultist, because our Curse of Narcotis game centered around that quite a bit. You've returned. Maybe. I can see you. But you're gone. Alright, like I was saying, so, Nerdarchus Ted had us investigating sewers and blood cultists, and we found this room where rituals had been enacted, and there were sigils in the floor, grooves that were carved into it, made of, which you could see, like, the dried blood. So one of us was like, hey, I think there's like a chest in this room with treasure. That's the buddy I was talking about. So I was kind of like, yeah,
hey,
you are back with sound.
I am. I do not know what happened. Zoom crashed. and I was like, and it was like loading. I don't know what happened there. That was really, really weird.
Yeah, and the internet technical difficulties happens. So they just listen to me start babbling.
Great. No, that's great. So sorry. I'm back though. Sorry if it also messes up the window positions or any of that stuff.
No worries. You're actually just about right. So I'll put you back where you belong.
Love it.
So what were we talking about?
I think you'd mentioned the chaos and how you're a chaos monkey. I think were the exact words that you used.
Yeah.
And how, we were saying that's kind of the way, it's about conflict. If stuff's not happening in the game, it's not as fun for fictional characters to just sit around
and talk and plan.
Yeah, it's like sometimes it can be to role play, but
yeah,
it's better when there's something wrong and you're trying to fix it. That's usually great.
There's got to be tension, right? There's got to be some
tension,
kind of tension
exactly.
and drama to kind of keep things interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
So during the apocalypse, have you been gaming more or less or the same?
More. I've actually been gaming more, but that's not necessarily because of the apocalypse. It's more because we finished the book, and it's we're doing the final stage. So that's been my whole life. It's been hours and hours and hours and hours every week just finishing that thing. So now that that's wrapped up, one of the first things I did was just, hey, I want to actually start playing in some games again. So I actually have been gaming more, but that's less because of the apocalypse and more because big deadline is over.
Freed up time, yeah.
Yeah.
So what games are you playing? I know Absolute Tabletop, you guys have a couple things that you've been working on. Some of them are 5e related and some of them are not.
Yeah, so in terms of like what we're writing as a company, we actually have a science fantasy rule set called Harbinger. And the new playtest for that drops tomorrow. And so this is kind of big news. It's not like a secret or anything, but what we're doing is we're moving it from a playtest to a beta. And the main difference there is that means that you don't have to sign up for a playtest and agree to the opta. The rules are in a good place now. So what we're going to do is it's basically this 50 plus page book of 5e science fantasy, all new classes, all new races, and a bunch of cool, there's a whole brand new magic system where you use Astra and all this stuff. It's going to be free as well on our site. So you just download it for free, and it's just a beta. That comes out tomorrow, and we are super excited.
How do you guys make any money? Everything's free.
So it's funny you say that. So the first thing we did was the Dead Man's Guide Kickstarter. So that was already paid for. Yeah. So the character creation guide is just to get more people playing in the world. So like, it's way easier as a game master. Cause then, look, and everybody's different, but if your players are like, hey, can I look at the book? You can do a screen share, or you can send them a PDF and just say, hey, just don't send it to anybody else, or delete this when you're done. Or if you just bought a Dead Man's Guide and you find out that I give away all the character creation rules for free, you're way more likely to run it, in my opinion. Because then you just send everybody the character stuff. So with Harbinger, the idea is this is just to get people into the game, get them playing it, and then we will kickstart it. We're 100% going to kickstart it for tons more art and like additional proofing and writing. So we just thought, like, let's just get people playing the game now so that when it kickstarts, they're excited about it and they already know what they're getting.
So there's also, you guys also have like a mecha hack game. Is that you guys or is that just Matt?
No, that's us. It's Absolute Tabletop. Matt was the lead designer.
Yeah.
And it was his brainchild, but that's a rules light, very clean, lean system if you want to run anything mecha. So that's like, it's very flexible. So there's a little like mini campaign setting guide in there, but most people use it to run Transformers or Voltron or Robotech or any mecha. And it's flexible enough and super easy. It's based off the Black Hack, hence the mecha hack.
Yeah.
But there are a couple tweaks, couple changes to that system. A bunch of enemies you can run on the fly and write in the book. It's super, super lean and mean. We're also working on, now this one isn't free yet, but we're also working on some more cool stuff for the mecha hack as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
So DBJ wants to know if you can describe Dragon Grin and the adjustable tables that fill out the cultures and the world, the meta of the divergent timelines. Seems like a really light topic there.
Yeah, right? So what he's talking about is this, and I'll actually flip to it in the book, and DBJ, good call. What we purposefully did is the Dismembered Lord is the big bad of the setting, and he is a chrono lich. And what he does is he saw his death, like looking to the future. In every timeline, he saw his own death. So what he did was he's like, well, I'll make my own. And he sort of cobbled together Dragon Grin by stealing other people's timelines. So that's his jam. So we were like, all right, well, let's play with that. So canonically speaking, so like this is canon from the creators. We're telling you this. All timelines exist as their own fully functional canonical worlds. So when you take a Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin and run it at your table, it's one world in the multiverse of Dragon Grin, but it's canon. So whatever you say is actually canon in your world. And so the Dismembered Lord uses this device called a crucible, and it's kind of like this heat map, right? So basically, the crucible foresees all the timelines, and then these innumerable versions, it means that each game master's specific version is a unique timeline that formally exists. And so for every new Dragon Grin created by a gaming group, a new timeline is forged in the cosmos.
All campaign settings should be that way anyway, just because no DM needs to hear their players pointing out what happened in the latest Forgotten Realms book.
That's it. And that's one of the main reasons. We wanted it to be this thick so that if someone did want to dive in and run it as written, it's all there. And we didn't cop out on anything. But everything is super flexible.
Yeah.
So you can just change it. So something we also did was we made the book so that you could break the world. There are 11 different regions in there, each with their own full, like absolute beautiful full color map. It's like a world map unto its own. At the end of each region, there's this thing called a countdown to ruin. And it is like a roll table of 8 to 10 entries of like, this is what happens if the players don't intervene. And almost everyone ends in like ridiculous destruction of the region. And so we're like, yeah, blow it up. Make it so that these people die and this faction gets destroyed and this thing. And it's like the idea behind that is you could just start running your campaign as normal and then slowly work down the countdown table. And eventually the heroes will either notice or, and intervene or decide not to.
Everything.
But it's a good way.
Destroyed.
Right. It's a good way to make it so that the world feels alive. Like in one of the regions, it's like this mountainous sort of horror region. Basically, like vampires and monsters just start taking everything over until like the very, well, I won't spoil it, but it gets really, really, really bad. And if the players don't intervene, that just happens. And so it's like kind of like every part of Dragon Grin is broken or made to be broken.
Did you want to play an undead apocalypse? Well, you are now.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's exactly. And you could start on any one of those numbers in the countdown. You could just start your campaign on number 3 where stuff's already pretty rough.
Yeah.
And then just go for it. Something fun I did in a campaign I just started because I wanted to use the book we wrote. I made the countdown happen in another adjacent region. So the players are hearing these stories of all this stuff that's happening in the country next door, basically. And it just kind of made it a cool, like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is scary.
Yeah, is it going to eventually overflow to where we are,
Exactly.
Somebody should, why isn't there an adventuring group where they're doing something about this?
Right. And then they have to really make the call. Like, do we stay here? Do we go over there? And it's very sandboxy, so I'm not going to lead them one way or the other.
That's great. Then once they go over there to deal with that, then the countdown starts where they came from.
Exactly. And we give tips in there of like, hey, these are kind of meant to be like one at a time. Like, in other words, do you, but we're not saying every region is counting down at the same time. It's more like hey, when the players get here, kind of start this clock. This means the movie just started,
Yeah. What's
So, yeah.
relevant? Although there is the sadistic part of me that wants to see them trying to plug holes in a dam with their fingers.
Yeah, no, and the book is totally designed for that, man.
Yeah.
It's just, a lot of modular tables, a lot of customizable stuff. Like, so I'll give you an example. In most, like you talked about the Forgotten Realms, where you have to learn this person and what they did and the war they fought in. Like, we really didn't focus on a lot of that because that doesn't matter in the campaign. What matters is like what happened today, or what did they do today, and why does it matter?
Like,
so, like, you know what I'm saying? So we didn't do a bunch of histories and timelines.
Yeah.
I think our timeline section is like half a page or something. It's really short, very narrative. It's like a story. It's not like da 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 AD da 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 da. I don't ever read that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I used to when I was a kid. Like Dragonlance. Like Dragonlance had a really fleshed out one in AD&D.
Oh yeah.
But now, it's like, what do you want to spend your time doing? As an adult, your time is a lot more limited than it was.
Sure.
So Rocco wants to know: do you do different voices for your NPCs while you're DMing?
I try to. I have a handful. I do try to. So what I'll do, bottom line, I will pick a character from a show, and then I will do my best impersonation of them or like imagine them. Yeah. And because I'm not awesome at it, it never sounds like the character. So like and I do that for all the characters I play too. I'm in a game called Whispers and Fragments on the Erasmus Expeditions channel, and I blatantly try to play Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock. I'm no Benedict Cumberbatch, so it eventually it kind of like spans the range of just sounding like me doing a British accent, but it's like, I'll be like, oh yes, here we go, quite right, yes, I can't nail it, but in my head I'm imagining him and his face and his mannerisms and how would he act. I do that with NPCs and characters, and because I'm so bad at it, no one ever knows what the source is.
Yeah, I will do.
But it helps me,
I do voices, but I really rarely try accents because I'm terrible at them, for one.
Sure.
And when you're terrible at accents, it's just bad. They just sound really bad.
Right.
It's funny because I was trying to come up with a voice for one of my characters, and so I'm like on YouTube listening to people do like North Jersey accents, which is funny because my wife's like, "What are you doing?" You're like, "Because I'm from New Jersey." So.
That's hilarious. She's like, "What in the world?"
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens when you're married to non-gamers, and you get a lot of strange looks often for the things that we do. And even when you do have other gamers in your life, you may get some strange looks as well. So.
Oh gosh, yeah. Because there's always that's the other thing too, is there's different levels. So even when you're a gamer, how hard do you go with, like you said, like voices and immersion, and there's all different tastes on that side of things. So yeah, you can be in a gaming group and still kind of feel weird about how you play, So
it took me years and years to kind of like get into doing some of that stuff. And you see it. We'll see it at our tables where some people are like, when their character's talking, they're always using a voice or an accent.
Sure.
And
sure.
When they're talking, they don't use it. And other players talk in third person. It's all good. Whatever's comfortable for people.
Yeah.
So Josh wanted to know, any chance we'll see T the writer on another Tabletop Terrors session?
I would love that. I got to tell you, though, I don't know if you've seen his latest videos, but he's essentially retired from D&D. He did a video called like The End or Goodbye, and he basically just said,
Oh no, he grew up? God damn it.
You know what? It ended up, it was kind of a bummer, because really what it was is like, he and the video clearly states all the facts, but the bottom line is like multiple times he tried putting together a campaign and people would just like absolutely flake or not show up or not tell him why. And so like he couldn't get another good solid game going.
Yeah.
And his whole YouTube channel was called D&D Stories. And he basically was just like, look, I
He
don't
told all the
have the
stories.
stories. Yeah, he's like, and he's like, honestly, he goes, I'm just gonna move on to other stuff because I'm not feeling it anymore. It's not inspiring, and it's feeling
Yeah.
like a slog. And so anyway, all that to say, yeah, maybe when he gets refreshed, kind of refills his cup and feels it, I would love that.
Resurrects a new group. It's tough. I mean,
It is.
I mean, we've played with the same kind of group for the past 20 years, but I will say, like, that sometimes is like three people, right? Like, it was me,
Yeah,
Ted,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and maybe one or two other people, and the number of people that came and gone over that 20 years, it's, I don't know, tens easily. So many.
Right. And yeah, you have that core, but like you say, people come and go.
Yeah. Some of us will never grow up. Thank God.
Yeah,
Knock on
same.
wood.
That
But
that listen, that's my plan.
yeah. But others, they move on. And although I will say with 5e and what we've seen is a lot of people coming back to the hobby. So
Sure.
I imagine a lot of those folks that kind of like drifted off, they were like all in their like 20s, like, so now once they're hitting their 30s and 40s, they may come back because life kind of slows down and they get some time freed up, settled
Sure.
into things.
Yeah.
Come back to it.
And the other cool thing is that this, at least in my opinion, this is the first big surge of younger people who have D&D like ready and available to them, and lots of stuff available to learn it. Where, when I was graduating high school, that's when I got into third edition. Well, no, that's funny. I actually bought a bunch of advanced D&D stuff, and then I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. Third edition came out a week later.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wish the person at the bookstore would have kind of warned me about that. But
yeah. They're like, we have books to move.
right? I'm like, dude, that's a bummer. But I was just gonna say, but it was really hard to get into it. I had no one to teach me. I kind of had to just learn, and YouTube wasn't a thing. So now you can jump in and just see other people playing, and that is light years of like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I love hearing all the stories of like the old timers who are like, I found this one book and we started playing the game, and then 2 years later we realized there are more books on how to play the game.
Right.
We tried to make a game just out of the monster manual.
Right. And it's like, and that is totally okay. And that's how you get some of these crazy, cool, like, play styles of like, well, how did you learn to do that? Well, dude, it's the only book I had, so I just made up my own characters.
Yeah.
You're like, okay. Some nutty house rules and stuff come out of that.
So BK Dan wants to know, does the book Dragon Grin, the full book, have a fleshed out timeline for history's sake?
It does. So when you say fleshed out, so here, and I'll even like, it's so quick that I'm not going to literally read it, but it does put forth what happened for history's sake, so you have an understanding. So what we have is, it's called The Ages of Dragongrin, and it's basically on one page. It says millennia ago, and it's got a couple of paragraphs. Then it says centuries ago, couple of paragraphs. Decades ago, couple of paragraphs. And then it says now, and it has a couple of paragraphs. So what it lets you do is, it tells you the events that happened, like the Age of Annihilation and like these kind of flagship events. And it clearly lays out what happened, but it's less granular, so that you as the dungeon master can say, okay, cool. Well, in the Oedran Age, this like renaissance of Dragongrin before everything went to crap, you can decide. We'll give you some guideposts of like, the Oedran Empire rose, pushing the boundaries of art, science, and discovery. They ushered in an age of peace and progress. So it's just enough to give you all the inspiration you need. And then you can just like world build those eras if you want. So it's less about learning our lore and more about us giving you the ideas of like, hey, we did the work of coming up with the ideas. And then if you want to flesh it out, you can. And everyone's timeline can be a little different and still canonical, if that makes sense.
So, and for anyone that doesn't know, Dragon Grin is kind of like the campaign starts with like the good guys lost, and this douchebag's in charge of everything.
Yep.
So So it's I don't know. So I guess like, is it like I guess like a rebellion style or resistance style, or maybe you work for the bad guy. I don't know.
It's exactly, it's any and all of that. There's a lot of flexibility. We made sure to make it so that it's not necessarily that every player is going to be all good or all evil. It's a very like kind of morally neutral setting where you do what you need to survive. And some days that means X and other days that means Y. And so, yeah.
So in that sense, is the systems, the settings very different because the overtones you start off with are different. Yeah, they're less neutral. I want to say, right, because evil has kind of won, and that's the premise, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so here's another thing too. Um, the a lot of people have differing opinions on this. Do you stat out the big bad if they're supposed to be like Sauron level evil? And so we ended up doing it because we thought you don't have to use it. And there's even a breakout box. His name is the Dismembered Lord. And there's a breakout box that says, hey, if you want the Dismembered Lord to be a presence that is an ever like a force of nature style evil, do that. But what we did was we actually created this. It's really pretty long. It's 2 stat blocks, a human form and a monster form. And he kind of like, if you beat the human form, he loses his grip on his control of time and like warps into this crazy like time creature.
So
and the stat blocks.
Did you guys make a mythic monster before there was mythic monsters? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so. I think we kind of did. And so we have, not only do we have those 2 stat blocks, which they're meant to be run together as a CR 30. Not only do we have those 2 stat blocks, but we also have tons of information on how to prep. And there's this like, it's almost like a mage tower kind of situation where we give you these different levels to fight up to the Dismembered Lord. So it doesn't just feel like you enter a big room and there's a monster there. So like you basically work through, it's called the Spire of Knowing. And we give you these different levels with generators. So it's like, one of them is like this place called the Momentarium, which is basically like the Dismembered Lord collects interesting moments from different timelines that he's destroyed. And so it's like a museum of different moments. So it's got a roll table of like an endless hallway whose doors open up into identical hallways and like weird stuff. And then there's an exit encounter. And it's all very narrative. So you have to work through like 3 levels of that. And then finally you get into his inner sanctum. And then it even has a lot of combat tactics like, hey, run it this way. Here's his spell list. This is why. Do this on the first round. Do this on the second round. Consider this in the further round so that you can just approach it and run it and not have to feel like you're trying to figure out this huge CR30 double stat block.
So, I mean, that kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, the fact that like everything has its own, like every game, every campaign has its own timeline, its own kind of reality. So I've seen the connective tissue here with the Dismembered Lord, where you're saying there's other timelines that he's been in and he's taken moments from.
Right.
So does he so he exists across all these timelines at once? Is that the concept?
That's the concept. And we even have some bullet points in there of like, maybe your Dismembered Lord is different. And so we talk about like, maybe he's not, because in the book he's a sorcerer. Mm-hmm. But we give this like, it says archetype inspiration. What if he's a brutal abomination? And it gives you just a couple sentences on like, what if he was a fighter? Or what if he was like a priest? Or what if he was like a thief? Like Thief of Eternity and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we just wanted to make it super flexible. And what we wanted was everyone should think their dragon grin is the best dragon grin. Like, well, no, my Dismembered Lord could be your Dismembered Lord, you know?
Of course.
You know, so everybody.
I think that's really cool. Like, because to me, it brings forth this idea that you could have, have an encounter or a scene, whatever you want to call it, where you're looking at these other timelines and you could be actually seeing your characters, as they might have evolved in these different timelines. What if instead of going against them, they worked for him and they're top, they're top tier enforcers at this point? What does that look like?
Exactly.
Or they never got involved at all. They're just pig farmers or whatever.
Yeah, and you can do all of that. We made it so that you could never, ever, ever see the Dismembered Lord or encounter him, and still have tons of stuff going on in the world.
Now, I guess I was going to say earlier, like one of the interesting things they did in 3rd edition with Ebron was like their top tier NPCs are all weak, right? They're like CR12s, if they were uber powerful, like the Lord of Blades, compared to other worlds where it's like, why are we even doing this? Where's Illuminster? Shouldn't he fix this by now?
Yeah, yes. So it's funny you say that. We tried to do the same thing, but so every region is called the Dominion of Ash, and we basically made it so that there's a Lord of Ash over each one. It's like the boss, you have to beat all the robots in Mega Man before you get to Dr. Wily.
Yeah.
You don't literally have to do that in Dragon Grin, but every region has its own main big bad. And it's the same kind of thing. It's that neighborhood of like CR 9 to like 14. And we make it so that the player, it's absolutely in the book. You can easily become a Lord of Ash, and we kind of tell you what you have to do. The Lord of Ash has this thing called a Reliquary of Ash. It's an object they choose when they're appointed that is basically holds a measure of the Dismembered Lord's power. You just have to take it. You don't have to kill them. You just have to take it from them and present it to the Dismembered Lord. And if you do that, you basically earn the right to be a Lord of Ash, and then you're displaced. The other person's displaced. So one of the regions, the whole storyline is the Lord of Ash was just killed, and it's a race to his reliquary. So, like, if you want your players to try to become a Lord of Ash, it's like, yes, start here. And there's a way to be a bad guy and be in charge of a region.
I'm thinking you should probably kill that other guy first, though.
Right? And that's the question. Like, and they're like a CR12.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that's always the funny joke, right? Like, where's Elminster or where's Drizzt? Like, was he chilling? So we did another subsystem to avoid that problem. There's something called infamy. And so as you level up, there are other things you can do to gain infamy. But as you level up, there's a certain level you reach where you automatically become sort of famous because you're a high level and people are like, oh yeah, I know that person. So eventually, if you get infamous enough, you can't escape. The Dismembered Lord basically puts his attention on you if you hit a high enough level. And you have to decide, do you serve him? Do you fight him? And you can't hide it. So it's like there's consequences to leveling up, but you want to level up. So it's kind of like,
What was that? I think it was Dragonlance. You couldn't go beyond like 18th level. Because if you tried, they just like removed you from the world.
That's funny. They're like, nope, no. You've kind of, you're maxed out.
Yeah. Although earlier editions were weird, so what can I say? So we got some questions here.
Sure.
So Rocker wants to know, what's your favorite edition?
I think my favorite edition is 5th, just because it strikes the for me, just enough narrative and some flexibility, like the backgrounds and the stuff like that. But then there's a good level of crunch with a real simple resolution mechanic. The advantage mechanic is nice and clean. I will say this, though. If I had D&D Beyond that could make me a 3rd edition character, I wouldn't mind jumping back into that again. It's just that making characters in Pathfinder and in 3rd edition just take a lot longer.
Yeah, it's called Hero Lab.
Oh, there you go. See, so yeah. But and I also have, kind of a soft spot. D&D 5th edition came out almost exactly on the day my daughter was born.
Oh, nice.
And so that's when my brother and I talked about starting a YouTube channel called Tabletop Terrors. So there's a lot of nostalgia tied into it for me too.
Honestly, though, so I've used Hero Lab to make characters, and I've used D&D Beyond to make characters. I still prefer 5e and making characters with D&D Beyond because it is nice to make a character in like 3 minutes. We were we started this game on Roll20, and it's like a bunch of custom races because they're all like 18 inches and smaller. And
oh wow.
So my son had started trying to make his character on Roll20. Never really used it before,
Sure.
The GM son was helping him and walking him through it. So in the time that he did that, I entered like 4 homebrew races into D&D Beyond, and he was
Right.
able to jump over there, use that information, and create a character in like 5 minutes. And he'd been working for an hour in Roll20 trying to make this custom character.
Dude,
So
that's crazy.
yeah, so that is one of the things I absolutely love about D&D Beyond. Even like high level characters are super fast to make.
Yeah, for my Whispers and Fragments campaign, the one that I was talking about on Jeremy Lily's channel, the Erasmus Expeditions, I'm playing a 9th level thief inquisitive, and I made that character in 7 minutes. Like,
now, in all fairness,
it's like
5e doesn't have a lot of choices to make, even when you do level, especially depending on what you're
true.
playing. But
it's true.
There is something that I do enjoy about the simplicity of it. What
Sure.
it is you're just moving around big blocks when it comes to the 5e. I think the sweet spot for 5e is creating new big blocks to add into the game, more so than like tiny fiddly bits.
That's funny. This is not in the free PDF. This is there's a paywall for what I'm about to say, but we actually created 2 new subclasses for every class that are like super Dragon Grin thematic. And so like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And we tried to do that. Like we tried to do something a little unique. So like for the Bard, we tried to make it so that like, you're basically this, you write what's called the blood song of your party. And you basically compose this ballad of the party as you level up. And that song is about all of you. And it's like, so one of the abilities you get is called Terror Strum, where like you open up with the chords or the riff from the song, and it creates a fear effect because people know it and they recognize it and like, oh no. So we tried to get really creative. There's a time thief. So there's like literally a thief archetype called the time thief. And you use these thing called time bleed points. Mm-hmm. So you're like messing around with the stolen time of Dragon Grin. Like, and they're all fully 5e compatible. They've all been play tested, revised, play tested, revised. And there's 2 for each of the classes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So DBJ wants to know, do you fear being an open book, both in publishing and the mistakes? Has there been any drawbacks?
I used to fear it. I used to fear, I used to fear that if I gave away my secrets, then other people can do it. And then I realized that through time, I realized that it's not a zero-sum game. Like, we can both be successful. So I can tell you what I learned, and then you can use it. And then if I can help you make a book, well, now a book exists and your life's happier and other people are going to use it. So there are things that I wouldn't tell certain people, things that would be maybe, and there's a small list of like things that I would consider to be like proprietary, or like, no, I'm not going to tell you every detail of how we do everything. But in most cases, it's just better for all of us.
Yeah, there's not that much new under the sun, really. And, this is a very small niche in the bigger scheme of things. So, like you said, there's a small list of people. And in this niche, like, everyone starts knowing who those people are. So, you don't want to be one of those people if you want to actually have friends in the industry that you're working in.
Exactly. And the truth is that we all help each other. Like, I could not have made this book without the help of a lot of really talented people. And I was the project, manager, but they're just people who are better at things than you are, and you are going to be better at things than other people. And so lean on each other. So I can tell you what I know about making a book, but you were then going to be more open about telling me what you might know about something else.
Before we got started with this, I was looking through the Keith Baker Ebron book that he just put out.
Yeah.
And yesterday we just did a video on the new UA, and they have the Spirit Bard, and in that book there's a dirge singer. In one of our Google Docs for something we're working on for the near future, there's a dirge singer, and so it's just going to happen, and you just have to go, all right, well, is it the same concept as what we have? Are we doing something different? Can we make it different? But it's just part of the nature of the beast, and I agree. The more people you can help, overall, the better. Be a better GM. Statistically, when one independent publisher, musician, artist succeeds, the entire independent group succeeds, and I believe that. You put the whole industry gets pushed forward when someone does something cool and innovative. And
right.
And sometimes it's like there's only so many components to a particular thing, so there's a good chance someone else is going to think of the same cool original idea that you thought of. It's just like we're all nerds and geeks, and we kind of think the same to a certain extent.
Exactly. No, and the example I like to use about like everyone makes something very, very different. If you stop because you're like, oh man, they already made a mecha game. This actually Jeff Doty, who's on Tabletop Terrors with me and James, he actually came up with this analogy to use anime. So digging deep into the geek trove, it would be like if one person was making Neon Genesis Evangelion, and another person was making Transformers, or another person was making Robotech or Gundam. These are very, very different. If you know these anime, their tone, their style, totally different. Technically, they all feature big robots, but they're all so different. And so that's what we try to tell people. Like, you could never make the book that we made, but we could never make the book that you're going to make either. So your dirge singer is going to be so different, or whatever yours ends up with, and both can exist together. And now I have two options.
Yeah. It's just the fact that, we're in a very creative space, right? So there's a lot of stuff flowing back and forth, and for us, like, as far as putting stuff out there, I mean, it's not hard to figure out what direction we'll go with things. I mean, we've got like 3,000 videos talking about things that we like.
Sure, exactly.
And you just put things out there, and the cool thing for us is when we hear those stories come back where people are using the stuff that we made up in a video, and how it affected their game, or they're like, I almost killed the whole party with that idea you did. I'm like, that's what you're
good
for. Cool.
Well, I was just gonna say, the thing is though, is that it's rare you talk about the time that nothing happened to the party.
Yeah.
You always talk about the time that almost everybody died.
Yeah, or
you know what I'm saying, like,
or you just like, or the party just like got lucky and completely overwhelmed the encounter, the monster, all that stuff. That's why like I roll my dice out in the open for the most part, because I feel like those moments that I had no control over and the players had no control over create the coolest moments.
Yep. And I am the same now. I used to fudge dice rolls. Not a lot, but like, oh man, I that would really be a bad moment for everybody.
Yeah.
Now I kind of just let it happen because it's cooler to,
Now it's fun. You're like, ooh, I don't know they're making it out of this one.
Yeah.
Nah, let's see what happens.
For me as a player, I enjoy that more. If I feel like it's softballing or that I'm not in danger, it's way less fun for me. If I feel like I could really die, that's the adrenaline of like, oh my gosh, we might not make, like you say, we might not make it out of this.
It's also really cool when you as the DM are like, I don't know. This isn't looking good. And then they pull it out. You're like, so cool.
Right. Because then they feel like they did something, and they know if it's challenging, it's really challenging, and they could have died. So it feels like a better victory. They're like, oh man, I know he wasn't pulling punches and we still made it because we used the mechanics and we used teamwork and we thought, and it was like.
And also too, like, I find like over the years, having run a lot of games, rarely do I remember my players talking about that time that I, fudged the dice behind the screen that they didn't know about. Like, it never created anything memorable. Compared to like when me being a shit and being cocky and being like, oh, you're going to try this thing. Well, I only need to roll a 5 on a saving throw and throwing it on the table and roll to 4. And that Hail Mary thing that they tried doing works. In third edition, there was like so many templates, and they were fighting this like half fiendish, half dragon, something Hydra.
Sure.
And all the heads were about to breathe on one of the characters, on Ted's characters, and one of the players had been saving a scroll of flesh to stone.
Oh yeah.
And and they, they wanted to put it in their spell book, but they're like, you know what, this is not going well for us, so I'm going to read the scroll. And they had to make a check to be able to read it.
Sure.
And then the monster had to fail the saving throw that was super easy, but you rolled the dice out in the open and it failed, and so this thing gets petrified as the flames are coming out of its mouth, and this Hydra is so big it has straddled the wall to the city.
Oh my gosh.
So petrified flames are like all around this one character, just
that's so cool,
inches from touching them. So and then later on, like, that statue is just part of the game world now.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's so cool. See, that's what I mean. Like, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, and I'm sure the people that like follow us regularly, they're tired of hearing that story, but it's a
one
really
thing.
good one.
I was going to say one thing I think I forgot to mention. DBJ, he did ask the question and I answered half of it, but something I did want to say about, like, have you ever had a problem? The one problem that I have had is when people expect me to devote a lot of time into helping them walk through it, but I really don't have a relationship with them. So I've had a few people message me and be like, hey, can you just tell me how to publish books? And
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's kind of a long conversation, and what specifically? Well, I don't know, just kind of tell me what to do. And so that can be challenging because I want to help those people. But so putting yourself out there like this does open you up to people asking you more often. And I'm okay with that for people that are willing to put in the work. And so anyway, that has kind of happened where we've had some sort of like people who really didn't grasp the fact that some of these things are hard won and we worked really hard. And there was a couple of young guys and they messaged me like, hey, can you meet with us? We would love to just figure out exactly how you do everything that you do. And I was like, I didn't know them. I'd never talked to them in my life. And I was like, well, it was an interesting conversation.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah. Hi, how are you? And they're like, yeah, can you just tell us like all the stuff you do and how you have this set up and how you, and I'm like, that would take a really long time. And so then the first question I ask everybody is, can you just show me something you've written, a background, anything? Oh, well, we haven't written anything yet. And I'm like, that's usually step one. I'll say, just write a background, write a feat, something.
Give them
and
homework.
Figure out. Yep. And just figure out if you really want to do this, because the writing part is the hardest part. That's the part. And DBJ, that's the part you can't mimic.
Yeah.
I worked probably an extra 8 to 10 hours a day for about 2 years on finishing this book because it's not my daytime gig. And that's something that not a lot of people are going to do. And so I can tell them all day what to do, but if they don't take the 2 hours, 1 hour a day to do it, it's not going to help.
Yeah. When you were saying that, I was kind of thinking that, sure, there are plenty of people that could, but most won't. So it
right.
doesn't even really matter that much.
Right.
And the other thing too, what you were just speaking to, is the fact that people have to respect your time and value the amount of work that went into that experience that you've garnered. So just coming up to someone and asking them, hey, tell me how to do the thing.
Right.
One, if you don't have a relationship with them, they're going to be less inclined to do it. Two, just because it's time consuming and you're doing these other things. You, like you said, you have a day gig and you also do this part time. It doesn't leave a lot of time. We will always get we get so many messages, comments, DMs, emails. It can be overwhelming, and people will get angry because you didn't answer their one question that they messaged you on your Facebook page. And I'm like, you know what? I probably looked at that while I was driving in the car. Don't do that. I don't advise that. And then put it down thinking I would get back to it and never did. Because 10 more messages came in since that time.
Yeah, that's so true.
Or someone will just be like, hey, can you tell me how to build a level 10 blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, you just described what you wanted. Why don't you just build it now?
Right.
And those are like kind of like the easier ones. When you're talking about really technical stuff of like how to publish a book.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. We also do a lot on like the process of creativity. Yeah. That's like, it seems like this sort of like, woo. And it's like, it's really not, it's, there is a process and there's methods that definitely work. And I'm not saying everyone's creative to write RPGs, but I think everyone's creative in their own way. And there are ways to foster that. So that's usually the first thing I have to unplug is most people have that stopper in there where they just don't know what to do and they don't know how to do it. And that's usually step one.
Well, that's the tricky thing about this industry is as a hobby, not even as the industry aspect of it. It's just everyone's kind of creative, everyone's DMing games,
Sure.
so everyone thinks they can do it. But the truth of the matter is, there's a huge difference between writing as an amateur for your buddies and writing professionally, to go into the next level.
Yeah, that's one of the big, when a DM who has the skills, they're creative, they have a really cool homebrew world. This happens pretty frequently, and I see this. They try to make the leap to writing an adventure, and it is way different having a note card or like your own document with some bullets and some rough ideas, and then having to write those things out so that someone who doesn't know your world or your characters can read it and understand and have all the details. It's very challenging to decide, well, what do I do? Where do I start? What do I put? What's important? What goes first? That's hard. So there's this big valley between writing your, like you say, your homebrew notes and then putting it in a published format
for other people to understand,
right,
and run from.
Totally different world.
I mean, for us, me and Ted, not the best technical writers at the time, but we do have someone who professionally goes through and goes over it, and also we'll just be like, hey, you said this person's in this room, there's no other way in this room, how'd they get there?
Yep.
And just little details like
little
that.
Stuff like that. Right. Exactly. It's not easy. And I have the other thing that people tend to, they tend to do is then they also overwrite. So they want to tell you everything about the world. And it's like, this is just an adventure. I just need to know the parts that are important to this movie. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't need to know about the whole world.
Heck, I've played in miniseries games or, games are supposed to be one shots, and the DM is like just unloading all this lore, and you're just like, I don't even care. Like, we're gonna play this game for a few hours and probably never visit it again. It's not gonna matter, and you're dumping so much information on me at once that you don't have time to absorb it, and it's also not being relayed in a way that would make you absorb it either. It's
sure,
like an
info dump.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's funny because if you look at a pattern for a lot of really, really good TV shows, they kind of have a slow burn where they give you the information, like in the next season, they introduce some new stuff. And then the next season, if you do it that way, it stays interesting. If you give everybody all the stuff in the first 3, what do you have for the next miniseries? Like, you already spat all those details on me.
Finding the sweet spot is hard, right? We just started watching a series called The Dark, right? And the very first episode, I was like, this was like an hour, but really all we needed was this, and this. Everything else didn't actually matter. Maybe it'll matter later, but
sure.
But I'm like, this could have been disseminated down to like 15-20 minutes, and yet there's all this other stuff. So I was like, and that's how you have to think when you write for RPGs. It's like, what is it your players need to get into the game and get going?
And so this is probably very unpopular, but I've started basically running campaigns where it's like, or a game rather, where my games are like 2 hours now. I just have like one thing happen, and sort of one thing happen, and then maybe half of something or a teaser for something else. But it leaves nice breathing space. So like the whole session will be like 2.5 hours because we get on, we'll chat, there's a break. I play online, so that's way different. I get it. If you're going to gather up in person, you're like, nah, let's make a day out of this. I just, but it's made it so much better. The players don't get burnt out. They're constantly excited about the game. I'm constantly excited about prepping it because I basically just prep like one major problem and then a few incidentals in case they go in different directions.
Yeah.
And it just makes it so much cleaner. Everybody's happy. No one's like looking at their watch. It's like the length of a movie. And then like, great, that was awesome. I got what I needed. And then they go back to their lives.
Yeah. The last
way easier to schedule too.
It is easier to schedule. The last 2 sessions I ran with what I call, the campaign's David and Friends in D&D Beyond, but it's my wife, my son, my nephew, and one of David's friends. And both times they're like, "Hey, do you want to run tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Sure." So it's just like 2.5 hours. Get in, hit it, and quit it. Be done. And like you said, just a couple things happen. And
Right.
it makes it digestible.
Yeah,
So,
and that's it. And then they remember it. They don't have to, it's just it keeps it lean and clean and simple, and then you can play more often.
And and also like if you're sitting in front, and also that works really well if it's more of a weekly game. I find, and if you're sitting in front of a computer screen, because around 3.5 hours, I do not want to be in front of the screen anymore. To be honest
Right.
with you.
No, it's so true.
Which is different, like you said, from if you're playing in person, right? Because if you're there for 6 hours, you probably played for 4.
Exactly. Yeah, with food and all that. Yeah, and I get it. If you're gonna I completely understand if you bring everybody over, you start early, you sit, you're chilling, everybody. I get it, making a day out of it. But especially now, as you say, in the apocalypse, that's not really happening as much anymore anyway. So, and it also makes it easier to commit to multiple games because I could squeeze a 2-hour game in here and then also feel like I still have the whole evening or the day. If it's Saturday and I play in the afternoon from noon to 2 or something. So it's not like, hey, sorry, I can't do anything with the family because I'm playing D&D,
Yeah.
So
I mean, and also like this, like you said, playing like this online just really focuses the game. We played a game of The Expanse Saturday night, and it felt like we only played for 2 hours, but it felt like we got a lot done in that 2 hours, and the story was told and stuff. But with that, I've kept you well over the hour mark. So.
Oh, you're good, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate
on.
it, and thanks everybody for watching. And like I said, just check out the free stuff we have going on absolutetabletop.com and play in our world. And if you're interested in joining a Facebook group that would have similar sort of philosophies as what you heard me talking about, check out the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. And you find a lot of cool people there.
Yeah, that's a really good group, tight-knit group. A lot of people. And they're playing games in there. They're just having discussions. It is one of the better communities for gaming online, I would say.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
You guys did a good job of cultivating that culture.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. You earned it. With that, everyone, until next time, stay nerdy.